Well, as we come to the end of our week of daily devotionals, we're moving into verse 16 of chapter 6 in Proverbs. And it's really a kind of a somewhat of a shift in the topic, but not completely, because all week we've been talking about the man who is the scoundrel, the villain, basically the bad players in life who do bad and wicked things and take advantage of other people and cause a lot of hurt and harm in the world. There never seems to be an end of those people who have that kind of bent or that ilk in their personality. And many of them, they come by it honestly. They were born that way, or I should say they were shaped that way by their parents. It's interesting that there's only two mental illnesses that we know are genetic. One is schizophrenia, and the other one is bipolar. We know that those are chemically based. Those are genetically faulty things that go on, mutations in people's brains that causes them to have all these problems. But all the other pathologies we talk about, the cluster B personalities, things like narcissism, personality disorders, sociopathy, psychopaths and so forth. All those things are learned behaviors. People develop them, and usually it's a response to some kind of harmful trauma or thing in their life. They went through something that was very painful. I mean, a lot of people were injured by somebody else. Somebody else took advantage of them, and they've been acting out all of their life. And unfortunately, sometimes they find out acting out in that way is profitable. I mean, in other words, narcissistic personalities tend to really do well if they're intelligent people. There's some dumb narcissists who are so obvious nobody would fall for them, but you have people who are really intelligent narcissists who are incredibly charming, incredibly intelligent, but also very dangerous because they can draw so many people in. And so those kind of personalities are actually, we're told, are increasing in number as the world becomes more wicked. In fact, I often refer to it as the most neglected prophecy of the end times is 2 Peter chapter 3, where he says the last days will be perilous. And then, the reason he says they're perilous isn't because of earthquakes and things like that. He says they're going to be perilous because men are going to be lovers of self, lovers of money, lovers of pleasure, but not lovers of God. And he goes on and lists some 19 or 20 different characteristics of these people who hate their parents, they hate their siblings, they just have this whole bundle of rage and anger and miscreancy in their system. And that's all reactive, so that the more narcissistic you become, the more your narcissistic system both rewards you and punishes you. It rewards you because it gives you an advantage in the sense that there's nothing you won't do to get ahead. It punishes you because you never have any real, meaningful, or lasting relationships. In other words, when a person doesn't benefit you any longer, that person will just toss them out, and they'll move on to the next victim. And so that's, really important for us to understand that these are the dynamics and these are real things in our everyday world. But in verse 16, he kind of shifts the topic a little bit by focusing on behaviors that God hates. Now, it's interesting. I said the other day, we are not called to hate people. We can dislike what they do. We can disapprove of what people are doing. We can point out that it's wrong and it's not right and all that sort of stuff. But we have to understand that underneath all that bad behavior and that miscreancy is somebody who is a damaged soul that has followed a path that has been usually set before them early in life, and they're just repeating the same errors they learned. Some people have bad behavior because they never learned how to be honest or truthful and never felt safe in speaking the truth in love. And so we need to pray that God would help them come to the knowledge of the truth and be saved without approving of their bad behavior. It's kind of like the whole LGBTQ thing that is certainly around us. I mean, the simple, obvious truth is that this is so patently obvious. As someone wrote me one time and said that when I was criticizing the whole transsexual thing in a message, they said, that I was so ignorant I needed to get an education. I thought to myself, like biology, because basic biology tells us there is XX and XY. That's it. You're either a man or you're a woman. There's no multiple or even third gender. They're just either man or woman. God in the beginning made them male and female, and that's the way it's been through history. And it's astounding, like we see within the sports field today, where young men are identifying themselves saying, I'm a woman, so that they can compete against women and therefore get a trophy that they could never have gotten by competing against other men. And you just look at that, you kind of like go crazy, and it's easy to become hateful. It's easy to become very bitter and resentful because what they're doing is so wrong. And yet we have to realize that these are damaged souls who have believed a lie and are living based upon what they believe to be the truth. Jesus said, if the lie that's in you is, if what you believe inside is not true, then, excuse me, I got that all wrong. If the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? So if the thing that you think is enlightenment is actually a big lie, it's only going to lead you into deeper and deeper, deeper levels of darkness. And that's why when you find people begin to embrace falsehoods, they just can't help but go further and further and further into that falsehood, because that is the very foundation upon which their life is based. The hardest thing in the world, and I say this not because I think it's impossible, but the hardest thing in the world is to admit you're wrong. I mean, think about the Apostle Paul. He is at the top of his game. He has letters. He's been dispatched by the greatest authorities spiritually and governmentally that he knows in his life to go kill Christians and arrest them and put an end to Christianity. He is on a crusade to put an end to the Christian church. And he's struck down on the road to Damascus. And what does he have to do? He has to admit that he was wrong, not just somewhat wrong, but completely, absolutely 100 degrees wrong. You know, that's just simply hard to do unless God begins to slam you in such a way that you can't escape it. And so I pray a lot of times that people will become prodigal sons. They'll wake up knee deep in pig poop and suddenly say, what am I doing? Even the worst, lowest job in my father's house was better than this. And I walked away from the best job to take this. What have I done? What a fool I've been. I've sinned against heaven. I've sinned against my father. And he says, I need to go home and confess that. The amazing thing is, before he can even get that out of his mouth, Father has already forgiven him and restored him. I think of examples, men like Chuck Colson, perfect example. Chuck Colson was one of the dirtiest players in the political game that there was. He was part of the Nixon administration, got busted for some of his criminal activities, ended up going to prison. He ends up coming to Christ in that process and spends the rest of his life advocating for people who are in prison to share the gospel with them and to really have an impact upon other people in the political world, to turn them from darkness into light. I mean, it's really, he lived his life so redemptively in light of where he had been. And he becomes really just a role model to myself. And there's great ministries like the Colson Center, which is an incredible ministry with their summits and their Breakpoint newsletters and all the rest of it. One of my favorite sites and sources of information. But these people, he did all of this simply by coming to the realization, I was wrong. I was in sin. I was heading in completely the wrong direction. And think about how Paul, somebody who was so completely wrong, who became so completely right, and who ended up being the victim of the very thing that he was bringing to other people, which is kind of that poetic justice. But yet, rather than him fearing the consequences of his actions, he celebrated them, saying, I know that a prize is awaiting me in heaven for the faithfulness, those years of faithfulness to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Interesting, he spent as many years serving the Lord as he spent trying to destroy the church. It's kind of interesting, kind of a poetic justice. But that brings me back to our passage here, which we'll have hardly any time to touch. But in verse 16, he makes the statement, there are 6 things the Lord hates. Again, not 6 people the Lord hates, 6 things that people do. And he says, in a 7th one, those are detestable, or we'd say in some translations read, an abomination to him. In other words, when God sees people doing certain things, they really nauseate him. And the reason why it's important for us to really take the time to break this down is not because so that we can spot that in other people, but most importantly, so that we can spot them in ourselves. Because all 7 of these things are things that you and I are guilty of at some point. and maybe of varying degrees, maybe not so bad, maybe worse at other times. But this isn't just something to have a cudgel that you can hit other people over the head with. It should be something that you look at and say to yourself, God, is this a description of me? Here they are real quick. Haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and a man who stirs up dissension among his brothers. So next week, we'll probably spend most of the week just talking about those 7 bad behaviors, which I'm afraid that all of us have a high degree of familiarity with. God forgive us and have mercy upon our souls. Have a great weekend. I pray that you'll be able to spend it worshiping together with God's people. Take care.